Hello. It has been a minute. Hi, I'm Andrea. I am a full-time graduate student in a higher education program, and I am a Latina in HESA. HESA stands for Higher Education and Student Affairs, and it has been a month. February has been a month, and I knew that February would come in blazing, or rather, I knew it would come in hot. I knew it was going to be a feisty month, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. I was a MAPC candidate, and am a TPE candidate. So I am going to talk a little bit about that, my experience thus far, my understanding of both MAPC and TPE, and kind of like what I'm looking forward to, and hopefully what I've learned. So for those of you who don't know, MAPC is the Middle Atlantic Placement Conference hosted by MACUHO, which is the Middle Atlantic College and Universities Housing Officers Association, something along those lines. MACUHO, it's the regional portion of ACUHO-I here in the Middle Atlantic region of the United States. And then TPE is the placement exchange. The placement exchange is also a placement conference. It's kind of hosted by most of the major HESA associations, so NASPA, ACUHO-I, ACPA, and I forget the other one. They kind of all support TPE, or the placement exchange. So my I don't want to say experience, but kind of like my understanding of MAPC. I had only heard of MAPC last year. I think that was the first time I had heard of it. And my understanding again was that this wasn't just a conference. This was really like a placement, a job fair, if you will, where you get to interview for different positions. So this year I knew, like, coming in and starting my first year, essentially, that I was going to be at MAPC this year. So I had been thinking about MAPC, preparing for MAPC. And so for me, what that meant was obviously keeping an eye out when registration was open, preparing my resume, preparing my talking points, and researching the institutions that were going to be there and the positions that they had open. For TPE, however, I've known about TPE since I was enough, and I was enough over a decade ago. I've known about TPE since I went to my first NASPA conference, which was back in 2013. It's really interesting because TPE this year's TPE is virtual, whereas when I first heard about TPE, again back in 2013, 2014, even 2012, I think, it was in person, and it was a beast of an event. Like, shout out to everybody back then who was putting TPE together, because it was a conference in and of itself. And then, so from my understanding, I don't know if it would go back and forth between NASPA and ACPA, but when I, again, knew about TPE, it was happening right before the NASPA national conference. So it's definitely different being that it is virtual this year. So a few things, I think a few logistical things that are interesting, I guess, to point out. As a candidate for MAPC, the registration cost was $150. And then I also had to pay for my my room and board, if you will. And then for TPE, since it was virtual, it was only $30. And so I think that was, at first I was kind of surprised, but then now that I've been through both of these experiences, I'm like, oh, it makes sense. So MAPC was at the beginning of the month. And again, it's a regional placement conference. So it's the Middle Atlantic, I believe, is considered to be Pennsylvania, New Jersey, West Virginia, Virginia, and maybe Ohio, I think. No, Ohio is ACUHO. So it's New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, West Virginia, and Virginia. I think that's, again, don't quote me, but essentially what that means is the institutions that were at MAPC, that were interviewing the employers at MAPC were from those institutions in those states. And I ended up interviewing with 7 or 8 institutions, if I'm not mistaken. And I think for me, we'll get to that in a second, that I was going into MAPC kind of like, this is my opportunity to kind of not necessarily get my feet wet, but kind of like get back on a not a horse, get back on a bike, because I had been interviewing last year for ACUHO-I internships. So I kind of still had some idea of what interviewing, especially for like an RD role or an AC role, would kind of look like or feel like. So it was more so about researching what was important to that institution, like their values, their mission, kind of like their ResLife structure. Not so much as like practicing my own experience, because again, I had already been kind of like in that position last year. So it was, again, more so about getting back on the bike and just pedaling a little bit more to get the hang of it once again. I had a really great experience with MAPC. MAPC was, it was at the Wind Creek in Bethlehem. I had no clue that this place existed. It was a really nice hotel, event space, very like clean and polished. I had a really positive experience with like the orientation, with the day of. It was a day and a half of interviewing, and I did interview both days. I interviewed mostly on the first day, and then I had 2 interviews the second day in the morning. And I also think we got really lucky because it wasn't snowing that week. And so that made traveling a lot less stressful, knowing that I was going into interviewing the next day with like 6 different institutions. So I think overall I had a really positive experience. I think for me, what's unique about my personal experience, again, as a professional, a higher ed professional who has higher ed experience, and then left higher ed to pursue other opportunities and experience those opportunities for quite some time, and then has come back and gained even more experience. I think for me, as much as I enjoyed getting to know a lot of the employers that I interviewed with, this is definitely a great opportunity for undergrads who are looking to pursue a not necessarily higher ed, but a graduate degree, and may want to look into GRD roles, like graduate paraprofessional roles, or grad students who are graduating with their master's degree and are looking for their very first like full-time job out of like grad school. And so for me, I think I'm not going to say that I was limited necessarily, but I do think that had I been looking for more like mid-level roles, I definitely wouldn't have been able to interview as much. But I think again that the demographic of this placement conference is definitely towards undergrads looking to go to grad school, or graduate students who have never had any experience outside of undergrad or graduate school. So I think overall it was still a really positive experience. I had a great time. I have had follow-up interviews, second round interviews since MAPC, so I'm really grateful for that. Again, I just like, part of my excitement in returning to student affairs is just like the the feel and not in the vibe. I know that's like not like, thank God this is not an interview because it's not like the best way to put it, but even though this is, I think the thing that I appreciate about higher ed is that even though this is, you know, a business, this is a, you know, we're here with a purpose. The purpose is I think connection, knowing that we are, it's very interpersonal, and I really appreciate that. So that was MAPC. With TPE, so TPE definitely a little bit more, I think, robust because it was able to be, because it is virtual. And what I mean by robust is that like TPE offered like a TPE Academy, which was essentially like these workshops that were geared both towards employers and candidates on not just how to interview, but like how to present yourself, how to communicate, like just like a lot of little things that I think were expected maybe like 15 years ago, and now like need to be a little bit more explicit, which is fine. So I think that was cool, but those workshops were happening at the same time as MAPC, so I was focused on MAPC. But they are available via the TPE site, the TPE platform, so that resource is available. And then thankfully the recruitment fair for TPE was the week after MAPC. So I had some time to kind of like debrief and refresh and kind of like get settled in again. So during the recruitment fair, it was online. It was kind of like this like time period between, I think it was like 12 or 1. Oh, the orientation started at 12. The recruitment fair started at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and ended at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that was very interesting because it's mostly like you as a candidate going into like these like chat rooms and like chatting with like an institution, and then from there like the structure was very informal, and it was also a little like disorienting in the sense that the platform itself is a little confusing to navigate. But I think once we all kind of got the gist of it, we all understood that it was like really about like putting yourself out there and like then having that institution like respond to your putting out there-ness. And so with that being said, I think with the institutions at TPE, there were less institutions that I was like interested in connecting with, due to mostly because of regional locations. I know for me, as I am looking for the next step in my career, I'm very conscious about my negotiables and my non-negotiables, and for me I think location is definitely one of those things that I'm like leaning more towards non-negotiable than negotiable, especially because again I have so much experience, and I feel like I do need to advocate for that, and I do need to think about fit like for myself as well. I know that once I join a team, once I join an institution, that I am an agent of that institution, that I'm serving that institution and its students. But before I do that, I also need to be conscious of what I personally need. And so with that being said, I did have less interviews with TPE, but not because I wasn't being offered interviews, but more so because I was very intentional about like who I wanted to interview with. And there were a few schools, like 1 or 2 schools that I'm really, really excited about that I did get to interview with. And I am now waiting on whether I get invited for a second round interview or not. And I think the prospects are just very exciting. TPE just closed today. So it's been about a month of kind of being in a TPE candidate. And so I think that even with TPE, having it be virtual was, not that it was a negative experience, it wasn't, it just, it was definitely different than what I was expecting. Because again, back in 2013, 2014, when I was enough and I was going to NASPA, like TPE was its own world. Like being a TPE candidate back then must have been like a whirlwind. And not that that's what I wanted. And so what I was gonna say about February ended up being like much more tolling than I anticipated, because I did get a cold. And I'm not surprised. I had gone to MAPC. I had been meeting with students for one-on-ones, and as you can see, and they have all been sick. My institution has been dealing with a bunch of viruses essentially since we got back for this semester. So I'm not surprised they got sick. I'm just, it's obviously not convenient, because even while I was sick, I still had class. I still had to do things. I still had to interview. I still had to like be present and available. I was on call last weekend, even though I was sick. But luckily enough, I am recovering, and again, I'm really glad that I did both MAPC and TPE. And I think for me, because of the nature of the work that we do, I love being in person. I love like meeting with people in person. So I would have loved for TPE to have been in person, but I also understand that that TPE is more accessible now that it's virtual. And so yeah, that was MAPC and TPE for me. I have at least one second round interview next month, which is in tomorrow. No, not tomorrow, next week. Next month is already next week, which is wild. We're already closing in on Q1 of 2026. And I think that if you're considering MAPC and or TPE, I think I would make sure that you're researching the schools that you're planning to interview with, and be comfortable talking about the culture, being comfortable talking about like the students that are at that institution and why you connect with that population. Well, what is it about that student group that you are excited to work with? I think with both TPE and MAPC, I think a big thing is like also because employers are reaching out to you, even though you may not be interested for whatever reason in interviewing with that school. I think it's still important to say that, like, hey, thank you for reaching out. I really appreciate the opportunity that you've given me, but I am going to pass on this because I have other opportunities that I'm focused on, right? And I think that with MAPC and TPE, I think I would have been I wish I would have been a little bit more like, not open, but what's the word I'm looking for? I wish I would have anticipated getting sick, so that way I would have had less stuff on my plate, because TPE and MAPC is definitely going to take up a lot of time. Not because of busy work, but because of intentional work. Again, researching these institutions is not just about what you are interested in, it's about what you understand about that institution, and if your understanding and your skill set are a good match for what the institution and that Department of ResLife is looking for. So those are my thoughts on MAPC and TPE. My institution is going into spring break next week, so I'm so excited to kind of have some time away from my institution, hopefully like fully recover next week now that I'll be away, and hear back from the first round interviews that I had with TPE for next month. And so with that being said, I was sick, so I missed class because of TPE, or my student development class because of TPE, and because I was sick. So I owe you 2 videos, one on self-authorship and then the other one on ecological system theories. And we just finished up racial identity development, which was super cool. So I owe you 3 videos actually. So I hope to do those during spring break. So ooh, I'm excited to get back into Latina and HESA. Like I said, this for me is really about keeping my word to myself and keeping my own promises and honoring my own word, especially to myself. And Latina and HESA is something that I've been thinking about and holding on to for a very long time. So it's important for me to make sure that I am doing my due diligence to keep up with this this platform. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.